Today we've been in this series now. I was out last week, and some of you have asked, and went to see my mom, and she's doing real well. I did a lot of chores basically for her, and so. But it was good. It was good to be there, but it's great to be back. I don't know about you guys, but it did my heart. It did my heart real good when I drove up on the campus and to see that messed up place out there. Y'all know what I'm talking about? That means construction's happening, the children's building's going, and so they're working real hard. I'm just excited about that, guys. It's going to be cool. It's going to be exciting. I'm looking forward to it. So anyway, again, the Bible, 2 Corinthians chapter 10. Today's title is Spiritual Warfare and battle, whatever. Paul uses an analogy here to soldiers and battle in this, what he's talking about. But guys, that title, I almost didn't call the title that, but then I did it on purpose so that I could explain it. I mean, do you know how much information is out there written on this subject, this spiritual warfare or whatever? And it, I've read a whole lot of it, and it's a very simple concept, and yet so much weirdness has been written. I mean, weird stuff. And I just want you to know the truth. That's been the cool part about just going verse by verse through the scriptures. Just let it speak, right? Let it share. And if you read it close enough, it'll tell you very, very simply what is he talking about when he talks about spiritual battle or spiritual warfare. So obviously we're not talking about physical warfare, which is, bombs and planes and all the rest. So he's talking about something that is spiritual, that which is within. So he's already talked about this treasure inside jars of clay. We're the jars of clay. That is within, right? His treasure. That is the gospel, is the difference, the new creation, all the different things that are now within us. So what we're talking about is a war on the inside. And so how do you battle those? That's what he's talking about. Now, context is huge for this one. So I'm going to take a little bit extra time to share with you because a lot of times people don't get the context, and then you're reading down through it, and it either doesn't make sense or it can really be misinterpreted. So let's just get it for what it says. But first of all, let me explain to you the context. Obviously, Paul had started a church in Corinth. Corinth was a real decadent place, very, very wealthy place, very intellectual type place. But also very decadent. It was a lot of things going on. Had two ports, but anyway. So basically, he started this church, and I just want you to hear everything and the reason that 2 Corinthians was written. All right. First of all, Paul started the church and he built it up. He stayed there for 20 months. This is found in Acts chapter 18, verse 1 through 8. So if you want to read about it, he started the church. He went in there, right? He just shared the gospel. God worked. People's lives were changed, and we're changing. And again, he stayed there for a while, but then he moved on, right? Because if you take a look at the book of Acts, Paul moved to a lot of different places. He stayed in Ephesus for 3 years. So he would go around and he would share, right, to all these different places. And Corinth was just like that. He stayed there 20 months, right? And it said when he went to go, he says they began to have some problems. And so Paul wrote them a letter. It's referred to in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 9. Now, we don't have this letter. But Paul wrote them a letter because they were having problems. Well, the Corinthians wrote Paul back and had a whole lot of questions. Okay? And so when Paul got that letter, he wrote answering questions that they had for him. That's 1 Corinthians. If you read through 1 Corinthians, you'll notice sometimes Paul will say, hey, in answer to your question about the Lord's Supper, in answer to your question about whatever. So that's what the book of 1 Corinthians is all about. Paul trying to address, all of the problems they were having. I mean, Corinth was one messed up place. And so that's the reason for such a long letter. And so we've already talked about that. That's the book of 1 Corinthians, right? Right? So you'll find that he wrote them a letter and he answered the questions. But then a group, this is interesting. I just want you, again, when you get this piece, then the rest of the book, the rest of this chapter is going to really make sense to you. So what happened was some false apostles came in. And Paul called them false apostles. And they came in commending themselves. They came in and started bragging, and they were obviously pretty good communicators. But they were basically Judaizers. They were basically, but it was different from what we would call the Jewish folks of this day. They had that background, but they also had this mysticism kind of or whatever. But basically they came in with a lot of different tactics, manipulation tactics, a lot of different things. And it really messed the Corinthians up. But the first thing they had to do was that they had to attack Paul. Because if they're going to come in with all of their stuff, then they've got to attack Paul and say, well, look at Paul, and they kind of made fun of him, they criticized him, and basically, tried to lower him so they could increase their own importance. So they basically came in and they set themselves up as authoritative, right? And the manipulation that they did, this is classic stuff, is that they began to share with them that there was all kinds of secret knowledge that they didn't know, but they were going to be dependent on them to give it to them. And that here we go, that they were missing out on all that God had for them. All right, you have to be careful. As believers, if you are a believer here today, guys, I'm already going to tell you, if you're a believer here today, this one will follow you around. What I'm going to be talking about to you today will follow you around. You'll think on this one because it has to do with who you are in here. And the only one that knows that's you, and obviously the Lord. So it's a different view. If you're not a believer today or not sure, then this will give you a good look at what it means to be one. And so anyway, so they came in and started sharing all this stuff, and it really, that's one of the great lies that people believe is you're going to miss out, right? You're going to miss out. And I'm telling you, we have a whole advertising industry committed to telling you that if you don't buy their product, you're going to miss out. And it works. I don't know why, but it works. It works a whole lot, right? And that's what these did. You see, there are manipulators who teach God's word, and they're around us today. And their goal is not to build people up and build their faith, but their goal is self-centered. And that was what was happening here. If it's real important to me about me, then I'm gonna make this all about me. But see, that's not who he's called us to be, if we're his, right? If we're his. But it's an easy trap to fall into. And they fell into it. The Corinthians fell into it. All right? So that's what they came in to do. And Paul responded after he heard about what had happened. He responded with what today is known as the severe letter. He refers to the letter he wrote them in 2 Corinthians chapter 2. He wrote them a strongly, boldly worded letter, and that we don't have today. But the one thing we do know is that the Corinthian believers responded. You see, if people are truly believers, if you truly are a believer today, when the truth is shared with you, you're going to respond. You may get your back up a little bit, right? You may get angry or whatever with the messenger, but when it comes down to it, God's Spirit, if we really do understand the treasure in the jar of clay that we talked about a few weeks ago, then you will have a desire and you'll find the strength there to do what you need to do to make it right. That's what it means to be a believer. That's the process of it. So these Corinthians repented. That is, it changed. They changed. and they got back on the right track, right? So again, but Paul knew that wasn't over, because that group that had come in wasn't going to give up that easy. So Paul wrote 2 Corinthians to share a few things with them. Listen to this. Now that you know the context, listen, there are 3 parts to 2 Corinthians. First part, chapters 1 through 7, is encouraging them and telling them, guys, hey, in spite of how you've acted, you have to remember, in spite of what you've done, whatever, guys, I love all of you, basically is what Paul said to them. I'm not disappointed. I just was fearful you're going to get away. Why? Because it wasn't about Paul. Paul didn't take it personal when they messed up. Why? Why? Because it's not about Paul. It's about who the Lord is, right? And so so Paul, for 7 chapters, it's all about encouraging him. Chapter 8 and 9, the second part of it was about giving, and giving to the needy believers who were in Jerusalem and Judea, right? So he told them he really wanted them to be a part of that. Now, in chapters 10 through 13, this is the confrontation. This is where it changes on a dime, and it really, basically what Paul is doing in these next few chapters, he's saying, hey, listen, Corinthians, you guys messed up, but I want you to know why you messed up, right? I want you to get this piece, because you were duped. You were duped by these people who came in, and I want you to grow from it. I'm not here to beat you up for messing up, but I do want to teach you, because I don't want you to walk those roads again, right? You see what I'm saying? Again, that's what it means to be the life. That's the life of a believer. It just is who we are. Guys, those of us who try to pretend like we don't struggle, right? You're only fooling yourself, because you do. Guys, the battle we have as believers is a battle for the mind and the heart. All the stuff we have around us, yes, temptations, all the rest, but the real battle happens in here if you're his. And this is what Paul wanting to teach them. How to win the battles in here. Do you understand what I'm talking about? Now, if you're not a believer today, then understand battles usually only happen in the lives of believers. Why? Because there's a battle going on, right? And if there's not a belief in who God is, then in reality, there's no battle. It's all about what you think, right? But if we do truly understand what it means to be a new creation, right? If anyone's in Christ, he's a new creation. That's 2 Corinthians just a few chapters ago. Then there's a battle going on between the new person and the old, right? And that battle is real. In fact, sometimes it freaks newer believers out when they begin to really struggle, because they had this weird notion that if they became a believer, all their problems would go away. No, in reality, they've just begun. Aren't you glad you came today? Don't you want to come to Christ today? But at least you have the truth and understanding what that means. You'll see what I mean in just a minute, because this, I want you to hear, because once you hear the context, you're going, oh gosh, that's exactly what that says. But you can be lost without the context. So that's what I want to talk to you about today, right? This whole thought of Paul uses that the reason that they fell into the deception of these false apostles is because they'd lost a battle from within. And he wanted them to see the battle, first of all, and they wanted them to see how they could win it. If you're a believer here today, there is a constant move forward and growing in your faith. But those are all cliches that people talk about. But when you get down to reality, what does that mean to grow in your faith? It means to look from within and trust the strength of the new person that God's put in you, right? This treasure in a jar of clay. And it's to confront those things in your life that you know need to be gone, right? And as you work on them, right? As you obviously when you have a victory, if you will, Paul uses this battle analogy, a person who grows in areas to whereas certain things don't control me anymore, right? But it really all comes down to lies we believe. I just want you to hear it. It all comes down to lies we believe. When you believe a lie, then you count it as the truth. And then every decision you make is based on a lie, therefore it's usually a bad one. And then decisions turn into actions, right? And actions turn into habits. And most of the time we just try to treat the actions. That's just treating the symptoms. If you really want to know where the battle is won, this is what Paul's talking about. If you really want to hear it today. And it will make you think. You will look down at it and say, you won't look down at it and say, Jeff, what an awesome message. No. It's his word, right? You're going to look down at it and say, that's exactly how that is, right? Let's take a look at it. Number one, spiritual battles. Spiritual battles. The greatest thing you need to know is that you are in one, right? It's really bad when you don't know you're in a battle when you are in one, right? If you're his today. Now, number one is our approach, or A, if you want to keep an outline of this. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 1 says, I, Paul, myself, entreat you. That's, the word entreat means to encourage, but it's past encouragement. It's not quite begging, but it's important, basically, is what he's saying. By the meekness and gentleness of Christ, I, who am humble when face to face with you, but bold towards you when I'm away. The reason there's an exclamation point there is because that's one of the charges that these false apostles had made. This Paul guy, he's real bold with you, through these letters, but when he comes to you, he lacks courage, right? And so that's probably what he was saying. This is just how he kind of brought it up. Because I beg of you that when I am present, I may not have to show boldness and such confidence as I count on showing against some who suspect us of walking in the flesh. There's something else that they'd said about him. That they accused Paul of walking in the flesh. Therefore, the reason he was doing what he was doing was for personal gain and personal benefit. Now think about this for a second. What does it mean to walk according to the flesh? If you haven't been here through these Corinthians, look, we talked a whole lot about it in 1 Corinthians. The word flesh is just the Greek word sarx. It just means what it means. It's flesh and blood, right? But it became known as an analogy, or if you will, a metaphor of the sinful nature, the old person. So walking in the flesh is somebody who is walking according to that old person that lives in us. That is somebody today who lives totally according to their appetites. And we have lots of them, right? They're God-given, right? You have a physical appetite of food, right? There's other types of appetites, right? Appetites in a need to be accepted and all kinds, again. But if you live for those appetites, right? The thing about an appetite is that the more you cram in, the hungrier you get. Before long, the appetite controls you, right? Anyway, there's lots to be talked about there, but I just want you to understand what he means by walking according to the flesh, right? He says, they suspect us, and they accuse us of living that way. He says, though we walk in the flesh, therefore that's our life. It says here, we are not waging war according to the flesh. Okay, so our approach is different, guys. The way we do these battles that he's about to talk to us about, he wants you and I to understand that it's different. It's different than the way the world does, right? That's all you need to know right now. So let's go to number 2, or B, the weapons we use. Now this is big, all right? This is big for you and I to understand. The weapons we use. Go, what are these weapons, right? Again, it's an analogy. It says, though we walk in the flesh, we're not waging war according to the flesh. Here we go. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh. That is, they're not of the way our world does things. You know, the games that people play in relationships and all kinds of things, and the manipulation in business and all the stuff. Why? Because it's all people that want what they want. Therefore, you and I are not supposed to, that's not the way we do what we do. Right? He says that the weapons that God gives us don't come from that old appetite kind of stuff. But it says here they have divine power. That is the strength that comes from God, who is within, right? It says here, to destroy strongholds. All right, just right there. There has been more weird stuff written about that passage. What does it mean? There's almost this superstitious weirdness that comes from this verse of all kinds of stuff that's been written on this subject. I just want you to see what it says. Because when you see what it says, you'll say, that is what that says, all right? As opposed to somebody giving you some form prayer that if you pray it, it'll ward off whatever. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Well, just pray this, you know it works. Okay, that's preposterous, ridiculous, absurd, and any other word that I can ever think of, right? It is not, it doesn't work, God works, right? And that's not what he's talking about here. What's a stronghold? First of all, let's just look at it. What does it say? First of all, it needs to be destroyed, all right? But what is a stronghold? Well, I looked up the word, and basically back at this particular time, when somebody would start a city, it's not like today. When somebody would start a city, they would build the walls first. And sometimes the walls were torn and the city was enlarged. But the big thing to remember is that most of the people didn't live in the city, right? They lived outside, right? Where they could agriculture or whatever else. Now, when an army invaded, everybody came into the stronghold. They came into the city for protection. And they would stay in those strongholds. Now, and so for protection, right? So a stronghold is something that is to keep an enemy from invading or keep an enemy from attacking and winning. That's what so you're using this analogy, so it makes sense. All right, now there's a couple of things. How do you destroy them, right? We don't use worldly methods. We're not talking about actual battle here. We're talking about spiritual. That is the battle in here. So those areas of our life, how do we beat those? What weapons, right? And he goes on to say, because the first thing you need to understand is, what is a stronghold? Oh my goodness, more weird stuff has been written about that than you can imagine. But the next verse tells you what a stronghold is. I mean, just flat out it tells you. Here it is. We destroy arguments, ideas, thoughts, and every lofty opinion, okay, raised against the knowledge of God. The knowledge of God, therefore, is the truth. Therefore, these other things are what would be called lies. And guys, this is where the battle is won. Who you are in here, right? And really nobody knows that but you. Therefore, if you're his, then there's a battle that you wage, and all of us struggle, right? First of all, let me give you a few examples. I got hundreds. Let me give you a few examples of what kind of lies are you talking about, all right? Well, they come in all shapes and sizes, lies that people believe, right? And I'll give you a few generic ones, right? The missing out one, that was the Corinthians one, right? Therefore, fitting in, acceptance. You know, I have to do this, and to be accepted, right? But one of the big ones, and this may not be everybody, but it's one that we struggle. You know, when all the cool is gone and all the other stuff, when it's just you, the issue comes to who you are. Now, we'll get right down where it is, and it'll get quiet in the room as you think on these things, because people struggle here. Our world would call it self-image, right? Our world would call it whatever, but how do you view yourself? And the question is there value in you, right? And I'm not getting psychological. I'm just getting in here because this has huge impact in us. Right? Now, here's the thought. Say that we have someone who's been told that they're worthless or no account or whatever, right? Now, if you're a believer, is that the truth? No. If you're not a believer, is that the truth? No. But if you're a believer, and is that the truth? No. But if you believe it, it becomes a stronghold in your life that'll wreak all kinds of havoc. Because here's what happens. A wrong belief will cause you, right, to make decisions based on a lie, right? Sometimes self-hatred turns into all kinds of things, even to the extreme to where sometimes people have even downright struggles of just living destructively, abusing themselves, because there's such a lack of respect and value of who they are. But if you understand who you are in Christ, right? If you understand that truth, you see how that truth will set you free from that thinking. Because if you're just treating the symptoms out here, right, then you're not getting to the problem, right? The issue, the core issue. So this is what we're talking about. We're talking about thoughts. We're talking about who you are. You know, I could do a whole series on lies people believe. Here's 3 messages right here. Number 1, right? Lies women believe. Number 2, lies men believe. Number 3, lies that your children believe and struggle with. Because what you believe, it's amazing. Let me give you a few, right? I'm not saying that of course we live in a world where we want to make men and women the same. That's just ridiculous, right? We're not the same, right? We're not the same. We're never going to be the same. God made us different than he might make us one. So we're not the same. Sorry, all right? You can leave now if you'd like, all right? But we're not the same. That doesn't mean one's better than the other. It just means we're not the same, all right? Now, men, a big hot button, not that it isn't with women, but here's a lie that men believe, is respect is a big deal, right? Now, how do you get that respect? I've seen guys do some really stupid things, because they think it will bring respect from people around them, all right? Acting tough, being stupid, whatever. In reality, is that the truth? No. It doesn't matter if it's the truth or not. If you believe it, that's the way you're going to live, and it's making your decisions for you. Right? So when it says that the truth will set you free, it's true. It's true the truth will set you free. But I tell you what, when you've been told something or when you believe something, it takes a major life change. And usually that change comes from in here, mind and heart. Not just changing the action. Yeah, we can go out and stop the action for a little while, but eventually over time, that thought, that who we are, it just gets stronger and stronger and stronger before we fall right back into the symptoms again. So the change is in here. So that's what Paul's telling these guys. Guys, I just don't want you to feel bad that you got conned and duped. I just want you to know how you got there, right? And that is the life of believers. We need to stop, as believers, you and I need to stop acting like we're morally superior than everybody, because we're not. I mean, I don't want to bust your bubble, but you're not. I mean, seriously, if we were to open up and let people know the thoughts that you got going on in your mind right now, right? Oh, how can I be thinking that in church? It's because it's who we are. The quicker we admit to it, the less power it's going to have over us. Isn't that amazing how that works? Right? So as we look at that, right? Lies women believe. Right? I'm not saying that they sometimes aren't different because they're always different, because they're not. Because we have a lot of, it's not that women don't respect, but it's guys, ladies, you have a whole industry that's telling you how you ought to look and appear. A whole industry. And so many just live in comparison in dark places because they don't look a certain way or they don't fit in a certain way. Let me tell you something, that's a lie, guys. It's a lie, and you know it's a lie, but boy, when it grabs you, it can eat you alive. Anybody know what I'm talking about? See, we're not talking about, I'm not up here saying, you shouldn't. No, I'm talking to you about, hey guys, that's how change happens. That's when things begin. That's why if anyone's in Christ, he's a new creation. Why? Because you begin to get to the truth about things of all the lives you've ever believed, right? If you had parents that grew up telling you you're terrible, you're no good, you live the rest of your life thinking that, trying to prove you're not, and you find out you never get there. Why is that the case? Because you're believing a lie, right? And that the truth will set you free. See, these cliches we throw around, this spiritual warfare, it's not about us battling the world. No, it's about us battling ourselves. Because I tell you what, the person that can overcome themselves, they're the real strong person, right? It's just the truth, right? Amazing how it works. So he goes on to say, we destroy arguments and lofty opinions. Those are the strongholds. Those are what needs to be battled, and it's within. Raised against the knowledge of God, that is the truth, right? And take every thought captive. So it's talking about doing battle within, right? Is that not what it's saying? You're looking, that is what that says, right? Taking every thought captive, that's where the battle's won, right? And to obey Christ. Here he says, being ready to punish every disobedience. Now, question, punish what? Punish who? Yourself. Am I beating myself up? No. This is to take the thought captive and punish it. That is the lie. Right? All right? Therefore, lock it up. Get rid of it. You can't really ever get rid of it. It's always with you, but you can lock it up. You hear what it's saying to you? It's just an analogy that if you don't get it, it begins to get weird, right? And he goes on to say that is until your obedience is complete. In other words, you'll be able to not let that control you anymore, right? It's an incredible thing. A stronghold is an area in your life you don't have any control over, right? Well, if it wouldn't be a stronghold if you had control over it, right? Interesting. So let anybody deceive himself. If anyone thinks he's wise in this age, all right, let him become a fool that he might become wise. But understand, that's 1 Corinthians quote there, blah, blah. It has to do with thinking. Think, thoughts. As a man or woman, think about this. As a man or woman thinks in their heart, so are they. Therefore, you are what you think. So stop treating the symptoms and get to the thoughts. That's why it's important, the things we let into our minds, right? But that's another message for another time. All right, skip down, guys, to the Ephesians chapter, to the Ephesians thing, because I'm going to have to skip a little bit because the others have gone a little bit long. But there's another analogy using the same analogy in the scriptures that is majorly overused, and I just want you to see it. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10, it says, finally, it says, be strong in the Lord. Okay, good. And in the strength of his might. Now notice here it doesn't say you be strong. It says to be strong in him. We'll get to that in a minute. And it goes on to say to put on the whole armor of God. Well, at the time, the way they did battle was to put armor on, right? Right? And so he talks about, as believers, let's put on the armor of God. And a lot of weirdness has been made out of that too. But let's just see what it says. That you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. What are the schemes of the devil? Lies. Lies. Getting you to believe a lie. It's a lie that enslaves you. It's truth that sets you free. Right? For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, right, as a believer, right, but against rulers, authorities, cosmic powers, that's basically universe, right, over this present darkness. Question, this present darkness, what is that? All right, well, let me ask you a question. We're talking about thoughts here. We're talking about all these type of things. What is darkness? When somebody's in the dark, what are they? No, they're lost. They don't know. They don't understand. But when it comes to light, okay, they get it, right? Now, if this room was dark, I could probably convince most of you that this dust doesn't exist. Seriously, right? I could probably get most of you to believe. But if you turn the light on, I'm gonna have a hard time convincing you that this doesn't exist. I may weirdly be able to convince 2 or 3 of you it doesn't exist, right? But for most part, no. So what does it mean, this present darkness? That means a time where people can't see the truth, right? They just can't see it. Guys, it is a passion of mine to help people see it. That's all I really care about. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I have learned that if I can convince you of it, it doesn't mean that you've actually seen it. It just means you believe I've seen it. Are you understanding me? But if you see it, you're changed, right? That truth is, if you believe that truth, whatever that truth is about whatever you're talking about, that's going to bring real freedom in your life, right? It says against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. All right, he goes on to say, therefore, take on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand withstand in the evil day, and having done all to stand firm, which was a battle technique. Hey guys, don't run, don't back up, hold your ground. It's all a big analogy that there's a lot more time later maybe we could spend on this and explain it. But let's continue. He says, stand therefore, stand firm therefore, all right? Fastening on the belt of truth. The belt at that particular day, the belt held the rest of the armor in place, right? So the analogy here is that it's not an actual belt, okay? I have to say that because it gets weird sometimes. People wear belts that have the word truth on them. I'm like, okay, you've missed that one. You know, poor little Nikki missed that one bad. So here we go. So the belt of truth, therefore, obviously it's truth. It's part of this armor, spiritual armor. It's called truth, right? And having on the breastplate of righteousness, right? Well, question, where does the righteousness come from? Is it your righteousness? No. The Romans tells us that Christ took our unrighteousness, paid for it at the cross, and then gave us his righteousness, right? That protects us, right? Shoes for your feet. Talks about here the readiness given by the gospel of peace. The gospel obviously is who Christ is, what he came to do. Peace is what the result that happens in a person's life. So that's another part of the armor. In all circumstances, take up the shield of faith. Faith is you trusting in the truth. Therefore, this shield, right, that's called faith. It basically says extinguishes all the flaming darts of the evil one, right? What flaming darts? People have gotten weird over that one too, right? A flaming dart is me trying to tell you this table doesn't exist, right? But if you put your faith and trust in the truth, you're looking and saying, I don't care what you say. I can see that truth. I can see that table, right? So it's an amazing thing. This is the helmet of salvation, right? We know what salvation is. It comes from Christ. So then all of this armor basically is all about who Christ is, what he came to do. It's not about weird stuff. And by the way, all of the armor we've talked about, they're all defensive weapons, right? Last I checked, you don't take your helmet off and start beating the enemy with it, right? Seriously. You only have really one offensive weapon, and it says right here, all right? And the sword of the Spirit, which is God's word. Oh. And then prayer, which is the next part of it, it kind of is all hooked together. Oh, so the one thing that would leave us vulnerable is when we don't know his word. Therefore, you'll know the truth will set you free. Therefore, a lack of knowing the truth will lead to you being in the darkness. Guys, that's why it's a passion of mine. That's going to continue to be a passion of mine. Just let it speak. Let God's word speak to you. Not so much sure what I think, but what does it say? Therefore, you have the opportunity to put your faith and trust in it, and it has incredible opportunity to be free in different areas. It's an amazing thing. It's incredible how it works when you understand it. All right, good. Number 2 is spiritual authenticity. This is basically something Paul talks about. First of all, he gives this warfare analogy, right, of truth and thoughts, right, and how you overcome those things and how knowing the truth and all of the different things. But this second part he goes on, you'll see what I'm talking about, is what I call authenticity. That is, you are who you are. Look at this. Look at what's before your eyes, Paul says, right? Just look at it. He said, if anyone's confident he's Christ, let him remind himself that just as he is Christ, we are too. So understanding that if you're a believer, right, if you truly are his, then we are all connected, right? Now you've got these other false apostles. They're doing their best to discredit everybody but themselves. It's just a tactic that people use, right? All right, look at this. For even if we boast a little too much about our authority, he goes on to say, all right, which the Lord gave us for building you up and not for destroying you. And guys, hear this. This is incredible. Therefore, Paul's trying to tell them more. If God's in it, the purpose is to build you up. But notice these people that had come in. They're doing nothing but dividing everybody and causing problems. And I tell you what, in doing what I do, I keep a pretty close eye out for people who cause problems and create dissension. Because I can promise you they're not doing God's work. Are you hearing me? They may think they are. These false apostles sure thought they were. But that is not how God works in and through. His desire is for people to be built up and to grow. Interesting, huh? Interesting. All right, I will not be ashamed. I do not want to appear to frightening in my letters, right? In other words, that's not my point. He says, for they say, okay, look at this. This is classic. For they say, who's he talking about? These false apostles. Listen to this. His letters are weighty and strong, but his bodily presence is weak, and his speech is of no account. In other words, okay, he may write well, all right, but he's as ugly as a mud post. Is that not what it says? I mean, I'm adding a little effect. But his bodily presence is weak. Basically, they say, he's just downright ugly. I mean, how can you be? So isn't it interesting how their attacks become personal? Guys, that's the way the world battles. That's the way the world acts. If you're his, that's not who he's called you to be. Be real careful how you beat up and criticize people who aren't even in the room. This is what he's talking about, right? But his bodily presence is weak, and it says here, his speech is of no account. Have you ever tried listening to Paul? Oh, what a snore. You see, Paul said many times, I do not think Paul was a great communicator. I really don't, because I've just read a lot of this and just looked at the words. I don't think he was a great communicator. But the one thing he always stuck with was making sure that the truth was shared and understood. And then God used it and worked in people's lives. And it was unmistakable. That's what Paul keeps bringing them back to. You see, the Greeks were real passionate people. They loved Greek theater, right? They were some of the earliest of that. Greek theater, Greek tragedies, right? But also another thing they loved to do is to go and hear oratories. Oh, I couldn't do it. But they would go and just hear people give these speeches, and they loved the communicators because it moved them. You know, it moved their emotions, and they cheered, yeah, But be real careful, because what can charge and fire you up now usually doesn't last. God's change in your life is in here, not in how you feel. And the Corinthians fell into that. Because these people came in with their charisma, right? And they're telling the people, have you seen Paul's sandals? They were so last year. Are you hearing me? Guys, I'm not saying you shouldn't wear stylish clothes. That's not what I'm saying. Don't write me a letter. But what I am saying to you is, guys, that's not who we are. That's not how we get who we are. And that's not the truth that sets us free. If you want to go out and buy a pair of shoes, buy them. But Don't buy them because you're trying desperately to fit into a culture you're never going to fit into anyway. Why? Because if you're his, you're never going to fit. Interesting, huh? So he goes on, he says, listen, boy, he can't speak and he's not good looking. Is that not what it's saying? All right? Let such a person understand that what we say by letter when absent is what we do when we're with you. No, guys, we are who we are. I think we live in a world that is just dying for somebody to live what they say they believe. Authenticity, right? All right, number 3, and this is where I'll close, is humility. Paul talks about this thought of being humble, and this will only take a couple of minutes for me to explain because he'll hit it again next week. But I just want to read the passages and just share with you. All right, chapter 10, verse 12. Now that we dare to classify or compare, not that we dare to classify or compare ourselves with some of those who are committing themselves. In other words, Paul is saying, listen, I'm not comparing myself to these guys. That's not who we are. I'm not a better person because I'm better than that person. That's not who you and I are, but that is the way our world lives, guys. And if you go down the road of comparing yourself with everybody, you're going to be winding up beating up yourself quite often or being overly egocentric. Right? Am I making sense? This whole self-image thing, the way our world tries to treat it is like, you just need to pump people up. No, because then they become a terror. Am I making sense? It's the old joke I like to tell you. You can treat your daughter like a princess, yeah, but you'll regret it when she starts acting like a princess. If you're hearing me, same goes for guys too, all right? So guys, it's not pumping up we need, because then we just become egocentric and proud, right? We don't want to beat ourselves up either, but either way, itself. We want to be about him in our lives, right? That's why Paul says, I'm not even going to compare myself to those guys, right? Right? He goes on to say, but when they measure themselves by one another and compare themselves to each other, right? He says they're clueless. That's my interpretation of that passage. They're clueless to spiritual things. They just don't understand them. But we will not boast beyond limits, right? But we'll boast only with regard to the area of influence God has assigned to us, to reach even to you. For we are not overextending ourselves as though we did not reach you, for we were the first to come all the way to you and to share the gospel with you. We do not boast beyond limit in the labors of others. In other words, it's not our job to take credit for what others have done. It's not about us. Therefore, all of what we're doing, what they're saying they are doing, and whatever, if you're truly his, you realize it's not about you. That is the hardest stronghold to get rid of, is the preoccupation with self. And if you're honest with yourself, you struggle with it. All of us do. But hopefully as we grow stronger, it doesn't rule us as much. Right? That's the life of a believer. All right? Getting over yourself. Most people get offended. I think it's a great statement. I'll say it to myself sometimes under my breath. Okay, Jeff, you got to get over yourself here. Right? It's a great thing to remember. You mean, Jeff, you struggle? I say, of course I do. I am not trying to lie about that I'm this perfect guy that doesn't struggle, that because it would be a lie. But I have found there's been great strength that comes from him when I don't trust in my own strength. If you have ears to hear, you need to hear that, right? All right, we got to be done. All right, but our hope is that your faith increases. In other words, Paul's saying, listen, it's not about whether you think I'm wonderful. I just want you to grow, right? Our area of influence may be greatly enlarged so that we can preach the gospel of the lands. In other words, I want you guys to get to the point where you go with me to the next place, right? All right. Verse 17, this is where he'll close, 17 and 18, it's about the same. But let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord. For it is not the one who commends himself who's approved, but it's the one whom the Lord commends. Now, what's he talking about there? Now, we'll pick this up because he'll talk about it next week too. But if you're a believer, I've asked you this recently. I think it's a healthy thing for every once in a while that the Lord will flash back in your mind who you were before you became a believer. I know who I was. Okay, I was not a pleasant person. All right, very self-centered, more kind of athletic type things. The things I did, the things that I thought. That every once in a while, God will flash back memories of who I was, because it always reminds me where I would still be if it hadn't been for him. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Therefore, if anything good is there, don't go around bragging about it, because you're taking credit as if it comes from you. If you're his. Why? Because basically it's not about me. Lord, it's about you. You find out next week, it talks about, oh, Lord, the only thing I'm concerned with is that you'll get the glory, whether everybody even notices me. It's basically what Paul says. It's the same concept, right? But boasting about oneself is one who is preoccupied with self, right? But when you understand that every good and perfect gift, as the scripture teaches, comes from above, then you understand this concept, of what it means. So what he's trying to tell them is a principle. Guys, these guys that have come into you and shared with you, they're up there boasting about what they can do and what they have done and all these things. Why do you think they're doing that? Because if they're truly his, they're not worried about them, right? They're worried about God receiving the glory for it. It's an incredible thing. I've got to be done. But as I close, if you're not a believer, then understand, that's why I always like to say, no church owns this message. Why? Because it's his work within. I had somebody tell me one time, Jeff, do you think only Baptists are going to heaven? And I said, I'm real narrow-minded. I said, I think a lot of Baptists aren't going. Right? And I think a whole lot of people who aren't Baptists are going, but you're not going to heaven because you're a Baptist or a Catholic or anything else. You're going to heaven because you put your faith and trust in who Christ is, what he came to do, right? Right? Therefore, denominations don't own this message, right? So if there's never been a time in your life you've understood what it means to be a believer, it's not about being religious. It's about him making a difference in your life. There'll be some people up here that love to talk to you, right? Pastors, deacons, others that'll be up here. They'd love to talk to you about what that means. If you have questions, if you're a believer here today, guys, it's a battle, right? But the greatest thing you can do is to fight the battle and not get discouraged when you lose. Because I find out you learn sometimes a whole lot more from losing a battle than you ever learn from winning it, right? You're not going to be perfect. I promise you're not going to be perfect. But stay in the battle. Learn to trust him, and you'll find he'll give you the strength to overcome things you never thought possible. It's an amazing thing when you begin to see what he's talking about, all right?